Hello and welcome once again. This is episode 5 of the series comparing ISIS to Islam, and the topic this time will be slavery and concubines. ISIS and Boko Haram have outraged the world in recent years with their enslavement of non-Muslims. Boko Haram enslaved Christian schoolgirls, and ISIS have enslaved many, including minority Yazidis in northern Iraq. One of the biggest misconceptions among liberal Muslims is around the topic of slavery. Muslims today realize that slavery is totally unacceptable, even within the minds of many Muslims. So many have now resorted to either denying that slavery was tolerated by Islam, or they will claim that Islam prohibited the acquisition of new slaves and encouraged Muslims to free their slaves. So the first question here is, did Islam actually encourage Muslims to free slaves? The answer to this is not that straightforward. There are occasions in the Quran when Muslims are told to pay fines through several methods as a minor punishment for something they've done, and one of those fines is freeing slaves. Chapter 4 verse 92 provides us with an example for this. Never should a believer kill a believer. But if it so happens by mistake, compensation is due. If one so kills a believer, it is ordained that he should free a believing slave and pay compensation to the deceased's family. Notice here, the reason for the manumission of the slave is as a punishment to his master for killing a Muslim by accident. Also notice how the slave freed in this case can only be a Muslim slave. Ibn Kathir's commentary says the following on this verse. And whosoever kills a believer by mistake, he must set free a believing slave and submit compensation, blood money, to the deceased's family, thus ordaining 2 requirements for murder by mistake. The first requirement is the kafara, which is a fine, for the great sin that has been committed, even if it was a mistake. The kafara is to free a Muslim slave, not a non-Muslim slave. Imam Ahmad recorded that a man from the Ansar said that he brought a slave and said, O Messenger of Allah, I have to free a believing slave, so if you see that this slave is a believer, I will free her. The Messenger of Allah asked her, Do you testify that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah? She said yes. He asked her, Do you testify that I am the Messenger of Allah? She said yes. He asked, Do you believe in resurrection after death? She said yes. The Prophet said, Then free her. Let's look at another example on whether manumission of slaves was encouraged. In the most authentic hadith collection of mainstream Islam, Sahih Bukhari records the following. Narrated Maymuna, the wife of the Prophet, that she manumitted her slave girl, and the Prophet said to her, You would have got more reward if you had given the slave girl to one of your maternal uncles. So clearly Muhammad here tells his wife that it would have been better in God's eyes if she did not free the slave, but if she were instead to give her to one of her uncles instead. One more example from Sahih Bukhari. A man manumitted a slave, and he had no other property than that. So the Prophet cancelled the manumission and sold the slave for him. Nu'aym ibn Naham bought the slave from him. So here a man frees a slave, but Muhammad forces this poor slave back into slavery and sells him on. Imagine how short-lived this slave's joy was. The next question is, did the Muslims ever take free people and enslave them? The answer here again is unfortunately a very big yes. Not only did they take slaves, but female slaves that could be raped by their masters. Now, I know rape is a big word, and I understand that some Muslims will feel bad hearing it. But given that they're slaves in the first place, it doesn't really suggest it's some sort of consensual relationship. In chapter 4 of the Quran, verses 23 and 24, we read about which women are sexually forbidden to Muslim men. So verse 23 tells us which women are sexually prohibited from Muslims, and it continues in verse 24, which begins, And all married women are forbidden unto you, save those captives whom your right hands possess. Now, I know some of you might still deny what this clearly says. Maybe some of you will say, hey, look, this is out of context. So, fine, let's just go look at the context and the reason this particular verse was revealed according to Islamic sources. Here we're looking at the reasons of revelation, or asbab an-nuzul, for this particular verse. And all married women are forbidden unto you, save those captives whom your right hands possess. We had captured female prisoners of war on the day of Awtas, and because they were already married, we disliked having any physical relationship with them. Then we asked the Prophet, Allah bless him and give him peace about them. And the verse, and all married women are forbidden unto you, save those captives whom your right hands possess, was then revealed, as a result of which we consider it lawful to have a physical relationship with them. Please just imagine this scene for a second. The Muslim army captures women who are still married to other men. The Muslim fighters realize these women are married and are reluctant to have sex with them. They take the matter to Muhammad and he reveals a verse which tells them it's perfectly fine to have sex with women married to other men as long as they are now your slaves. How is this any different to Islamic State today? This story also appears a few times in Sahih Bukhari and will be linked in the description as well. Another story from another battle appears in Sahih Bukhari. During the battle with Bani al-Mustaliq, They, the Muslims, captured some females and intended to have sexual relations with them without impregnating them. So they asked the Prophet about coitus interruptus. The Prophet said, "It is better that you should not do it, for Allah has written whom He is going to create till the day of resurrection." So not only does Muhammad accept the rape of enslaved women by Muslim fighters, he gives them extremely poor advice on contraception. Finally, let's look at whether the Muslims traded in slaves. We already saw an example when Muhammad cancelled the slave's freedom earlier and forced him back into being a slave to be sold on. But here we'll read about the story of the massacre of the Jewish tribe in Medina, the Bani Qurayza, in numerous sources. So let's read page 466 of Muhammad's best-known biography in Islam, otherwise known as the Sirah of Ibn Ishaq, the Ibn Hisham edit. Then the Apostle divided the property, wives, and the children of Bani Qurayza among the Muslims. Then the Apostle sent Sa'ad ibn Zayd al-Ansari, brother of bin Abd al-Ashhal, with some of the captive women of Bani Qurayza to Najd, and he sold them for horses and weapons. The Apostle had chosen one of their women for himself, Rayhana. She had shown repugnance towards Islam when she was captured and clung to Judaism. So in brief, after the Muslims killed all the men of this Jewish tribe, he took their property and enslaved their women and children. He then sent Sa'ad ibn Zayd with some of the women to a nearby city and sold them as slaves in exchange for horses and weapons. Muhammad keeps one of these women for himself, and she evidently didn't like him after he killed all the men of the tribe, which may have included her father and brothers. If this is not as bad as ISIS, then I really don't know what is. We also read later in the Sirah on page 593 about the spoils of war in Hunayn, and an incident where Muhammad made a deal with the men of the Hawazin tribe by handing back their enslaved women and children in exchange for their camels and other animals. Unayna took an old woman of Hawazin and said as he took her, "I see that she is a person of standing in the tribe, and her ransom may be high." When the Apostle returned the captives at a price of 6 camels each, he refused to give her back. Zuhair Abu Surad told him to let her go, for her mouth was cold and her breasts flat. So they eventually convinced him to exchange this slave woman for 6 camels, with the argument that she didn't even have big breasts and was not worth as much as he had thought. We read yet another example of Muhammad dealing in the slave trade in a hadith from Sahih Muslim. This hadith tells us about a Muslim man who saw women and children of a tribe fleeing towards a mountain during a battle. He then shoots an arrow and enslaves them, taking the prettiest girl among them as his own slave. Among them was a woman from Banu Fazara. She was wearing a leather coat. With her was her daughter, who was one of the prettiest girls in Arabia. I drove them along until I brought them to Abu Bakr, who bestowed that girl upon me as a prize. So we arrived in Medina. I had not yet disrobed her when the Messenger of Allah met me in the street and said, "Give me that girl, O Salama." I said, "Messenger of Allah, she has fascinated me." I had not yet disrobed her. When, on the next day, the Messenger of Allah again met me in the street and said, "O Salama, give me that girl. May God bless your father." I said, "She is for you, Messenger of Allah. By Allah, I have not yet disrobed her." The Messenger of Allah sent her to the people of Mecca and surrendered her as ransom for a number of Muslims who had been kept as prisoners at Mecca. So this overly keen Muslim was looking to have sex with this beautiful slave, but Muhammad kept insisting that he hand her over to him instead. And then he uses what was obviously a very highly valuable slave girl to sell her on to the Meccan pagans in exchange for prisoners. So in conclusion, for the point of slavery, we can see clearly it's more than justified in Islam in numerous places. Capturing women and girls as sex slaves is not something that ISIS invented. They understand their religion all too well, and Islamic sources tell them what Muhammad did and they follow. It's as simple as that. In the next episode, we'll be looking at the killing of prisoners of war. Please join us for that one. Thank you very much for watching, and see you soon.